So I know I don't always cover basketball. You know, basketball is something that I watch thoroughly. I play fantasy basketball. Like, I take deeper dives into the numbers. I look at everything consistently. I'm a really big basketball junkie, but I just don't do videos on basketball. But I watch a ton of videos on YouTube about basketball. But when it comes to like specific topics like the Rich Paul situation, I love talking about them because it involves so much more than just basketball, but also just shows the level of fear and jealousy that players and agents and organizations have operated in, where they just had a club that it's a small club and you're not in it, but when a guy comes in it and changes the dynamic of it, everybody gets upset. So I wanted to talk about this because I know this week there was this anonymous article put out by The Athletic where an anonymous agent was talking about Rich Paul and saying that Rich Paul is a detriment to his clients, that he doesn't get the best deal for his clients, that he doesn't negotiate in their best interests, and that his relationship with LeBron James is a conflict of interest because he ends up putting the players that he represents in a position to where they are, specifically attached to LeBron, whether it be, through teams or trades. And he, the person that was speaking anonymously, was really upset with what was going on. And to my opinion, and my answer to that is tough titty. And the big reason why is because that just sounds like you hate competition, in my opinion. If there was something that was illegal going on, if Rich Paul was getting checks from teams to convince guys to go here and convince guys to go there, then yeah, there would be like a huge issue with what Rich Paul would be representing. But nobody's accused him of doing anything illegal, which is the first point. The second point is none of his players have spoken out against him. And third, if you've looked at the situations that he's been in that have been under controversy, they either don't include him or it's the player who makes a rash decision. Now, I'm going to talk about point 3 because these are the points that are absolutely fucking lies that were in the entire actual article. The first one was the Nerlens Noel situation. So Nerlens Noel, a couple years back, was getting offered I believe it was a 5-year deal for $70 million. Something that was way above what his numbers spoke to in terms of a deal. But when you look at guys that were very similar in stat line, they were getting deals very similar to this. So it made a ton of sense for the Dallas Mavericks to offer Nerlens Noel a 5-year, $70 million deal. Nerlens Noel ultimately turned that deal down. He chose to sign a 1-year deal with whatever team he signed with at the time, hoping that going to a place where the system fit itself, that he could then re-enter free agency after potentially having a breakout season. Obviously, that didn't happen. Nerlens Noel is pretty much just a player that plays on the vet minimum. I still think at some point somebody's going to offer him a stupid contract and he's going to take it. But Nerlens Noel is just a guy who, he had so much hype and built around him coming out of high school. And the big thing for him is just that he got hurt in college. And that, injury just led to a series of continuous injuries that harm it. And that's just the nature of the game sometimes. And that does hurt your pocket. But he's carved himself out as a player that can contribute to a basketball team. He's not a guy that you hand a big contract to, but he's a guy that you can bring in on, a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal, and something that's way underneath the cap. And, he can contribute. He can give you 15 to 17 minutes a night. But he's not the kind of guy that you're going to pay 5 years, $70 million for in today's game, where you're expecting him to play 20 to 25 minutes a night, go out and grab, 8 or 9 rebounds, put up, 10 or 11 points. He's just not that type of player that you put in the system. He's not going to be, a consistent starter. So when Nerlens Noel turned down that deal, he wasn't even a clutch player. He wasn't even signed to Rich Paul at the time. He was signed to another agent. And ultimately, he ended up having to fire that agent after he turned down that deal. And then it wasn't until about 6 months later that he signed with Clutch Sports and he signed with Rich Paul. So that was one story. I was just like, this is a fucking lie when I'm looking at it. The second one was when it came to the Marcus Morris situation, and the Kentavious Caldwell-Pope situation. A lot of people, when they talk about Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, he had a big deal on the table to join the Detroit Pistons. And he ultimately turned it down so that he can go to Los Angeles. And if you're Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and you're saying to yourself, I could go to Detroit and make a shit ton of money, but we're not going to be good. Or I could probably take less money, go to the Los Angeles Lakers in a bigger market, and knowing that I'm going to be signing with an agent that also has signed LeBron James to the team. Why the fuck wouldn't I sign with the Lakers? Rich Paul wasn't there for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's Detroit deal. He came afterwards. And for what it's worth, it fucking worked out for KCP. He won an NBA championship. He made $17 million this year. And he's going to enter free agency. And the crazy part about it is there are teams that are probably still going to offer him the same money that he got offered in Detroit to sign him. So for him, it worked out. And, you take a bit of chance on it, but Rich Paul didn't tell Kentavious Caldwell-Pope to turn down the Detroit Pistons. I'm pretty sure some people sat there and said, LA, Detroit. I think I'm going to go with LA. That's really just what it came down to. And last but not least, let's talk about the Marcus Morris situation. So Marcus Morris was a free agent after leaving the Boston Celtics last year. The year before, I should say. He became an unrestricted free agent, and he was a clutch athlete. He was signed to Rich Paul. And Rich Paul was able to negotiate a big contract for him to sign with the San Antonio Spurs. For a lot of people, they liked the move. They felt that Morris going to San Antonio, it gave a lot more pieces for Greg Popovich to work with, especially because Marcus Morris isn't the type of player that needs the ball in his hands. He's a guy that can contribute on both ends of the floor. He's a good defender. He can shoot the three. He can post up into the paint. He can hit free throws. He's not a guy who's going to be a liability on any ends of the floor. And he had a deal in front of him with the Spurs. And at the very last minute, he backed out of the deal so that he can join New York. Even though he had verbally committed to the Spurs, he backed out to join the Knicks. And when he backed out to join the Knicks, he went to the Knicks. I don't know if he got the same amount of money to join the Knicks, but he got a very similar contract, but he was going to get a bigger role on the Knicks, which is why he wanted to join the Knicks. Knicks signed a bunch of fucking power forwards that year. But in the small forward position, Marcus Morris was going to be the starter. He was going to be a guy who at the very least was going to be the second or third option on that team. Whereas in San Antonio, probably wasn't going to be the case where you got DeRozan, LaMarcus Aldridge, you got guys off the bench, guys like Lonnie Walker, shit like that. And then he ends up getting traded to the Clippers, who... Let's not even talk about the Clippers. He ends up, being traded to Clippers, but, I'm a rewind because when Marcus Morris turned down that Spurs deal that he verbally committed to go to New York, Rich Paul, they separated their ways. He removed himself from that situation. Why? Because if Rich Paul would have still continued to represent Marcus Morris, then that would have been an issue for the San Antonio Spurs as an organization, and that would have made Rich Paul become a bit of a liability when it comes to negotiating players that he's signed when it comes to organizations. He didn't want to be in a position where the San Antonio Spurs organization would look at him and feel that he has some type of play with this Marcus Morris situation, because it was a bad look on everybody. And Rich Paul simply just separated himself from Marcus Morris. He said, hey, this is what you want to do. This makes me look bad, and I can't do it. I can't keep you as a client because of it. And he separated himself. So when people look at Rich Paul and they bring up all these things that they want to talk about with him, he's recruiting based on the superstar that he signed because he's LeBron's agent and he's his friend. It's not fair. You got the NCAA pulling up bullshit requirements because Rich Paul doesn't meet those requirements. You got agents talking out of the side of their fucking mouth because they can't compete. And all this really means to me is, I know you want to hate on LeBron as an extension of this, But Rich Paul is paid to do what's best for his client at the end of the day. Bill Simmons told the public after the Anthony Davis trade fell apart with New Orleans back in last year's midseason that he should fire Rich Paul as an agent because of how that deal fell apart. And it's kind of funny in hindsight how, like, now when you look back on it, I mean, Bill Simmons is a hater, which is the first part. Secondly, the reason why they wanted to push this far is because the Celtics really wanted to trade for Anthony Davis. And Rich Paul, being Anthony Davis's agent, was saying the Celtics can trade for him, but Anthony Davis is not re-signing with the Celtics after that season. Like, he made it very aware that Anthony Davis had no intention on signing a long-term deal or doing a sign and trade to go to the Celtics. Anthony Davis wanted to go to the Lakers. That was where he wanted to be. And he had the agent that was going to get it done. And you look at it now. Anthony Davis won a fucking title. That's what you call doing what's in the best interest of your client. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope won a title, you know? Draymond Green gets a $100 million contract, and he's going to keep getting that contract because he's a key player for the Warriors. You know, you have all these players that Clutch Sports has been able to sign and do what's best in their interest. And for a lot of people, when you look at that, it really just means one thing when you look at, you know, Rich Paul and what he's been able to do. It's just racism at the end of the day. It's the fact that you've got a black man who is doing things and opening doors that weren't meant for people like him to do in a league where it is heavily dominated on the business side by white professionals, and he is a black man who is doing this. It's one thing when people talk about, oh, the league is extremely black because there's a ton of black players. A lot of those black players don't have black agents, bro. Just be honest. A lot of them dudes have white dudes who have gotten a college education. You know, they probably come from middle class or high class families. They have extremely really good networks. You know, they are really good friends with TV executives and team owners and billionaires. And then you got this one dude who became an agent just because he happened to have on a throwback NFL Warren Moon jersey that LeBron saw, and LeBron liked it, and they exchanged numbers. And he liked the way the guy carried himself, and he kind of figured this is not the normal agent that you would normally go with, you know. But this is a guy who he has a lot to lose if he doesn't compete at this point. And regardless of how you feel about it, is a lot of the other agents, when they approach these young athletes, especially established ones, they don't have a lot to lose. They got a whole fucking client book list to it. Rob Pelinka was able to represent Kobe Bryant so much that it got him into the front office of the Los Angeles Lakers. So the idea that these guys have a lot to lose, like, imagine being a client and the person that's representing you, like, it doesn't matter if you like make it or not to him. Whereas a Rich Paul, he is completely invested into the success of LeBron James, because then it speaks to his success. So he's going to do what's best in his client's interests. And now he has Draymond Green, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Ben Simmons, and so on and so forth. He has to look in the best interest of those guys because that allows him to continue to add more and more clients, you know? This is not, you know, back in the day where an agent can, you know, can basically be a hotshot agent and just have a ton of clients, and he's just like, just call me up when you're ready to do a deal or your contract's up. You know, this is a guy who takes extremely good care of it. You have LeBron's agent spending X amount of hours, days, and time in New Orleans working with Anthony Davis to figure out a situation. You know, he's spending X amount of significant time in Golden State, you know, San Francisco, working with Draymond Green. He's working with his lower level NBA players. And it's going to be shocking if he gets the opportunity to now then venture into the NFL realm where he can start representing NFL players, because I know that's what they want to do next. They want to take what they've done to the NBA and apply it to the NFL. And that's going to piss off a lot of organizations. And the big reason why is the NBA has had no choice but to accept Rich Paul in terms of the organizations. You know that when Rich Paul representing your client is, you're going to have to sometimes bite the bullet and take a deal. And I want to see how it goes in the NFL. But this anonymous agent who released this whole fucking, you know, hit piece is a piece of shit, personally.